gifts you bring to this place, financial support, our personality and presence, volunteer energy. The grace in our lives can come from so many places, many of them unexpected, and sometimes it can come from us. So thank you for any attempt to try to be a part of the grace of the world. The best meal that I ever had was in January 1998. And to be honest with you, I don't remember what it was. I need to give you a little bit of the backstory to explain why it was the best meal that I ever had. I was in Boston. I graduated college in the summer of 1997. And like a lot of recent graduates in the liberal arts particularly, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I didn't have a job lined up. So I moved in with my parents at my hometown, and for a little while I worked at a fruit stand, which was wonderful. I ate fresh corn every day and sat out on the porch and sold fruit. But then the season ended, and it was winter, and I had been sending out my resume everywhere, not hearing anything, until I got a phone call. And that phone call turned into an interview, and then I got offered a job. This was back in the days when you could get a job right out of college. It's a lot more difficult now. And the job was in Boston, which excited me. It was about 2 hours away. It was a city, and I was excited to live in Boston. And so I moved up there, and I didn't have anyone to live with, so I lived in a youth hostel, which suited me fine. If you know what a youth hostel is, it's for tourists. It's kind of a fairly low budget. You live in bunk beds. There was like 5 bunk beds to a room. And it suited me fine, but it was a little bit of a strange experience. I'd been in youth hostels before as a tourist, but here I was in Boston with folks from Scandinavia and Germany and Japan and Brazil and all around the world. And I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I was the only one up. Take a shower, try and be quiet while I was shaving and putting my clothes on so not to wake up the folks who were nursing their hangovers in the bunk beds. And I hardly saw the other folks in my room. And then I would go off to work. And I hadn't planned very well. I'd had jobs before. This was my first proper kind of moving out, proper job. And I had forgotten that you don't get paid right away. And so I was waiting for my first paycheck, which you have to then put in the bank and cash. And so money was wearing thin. I was this $25 every day given to the youth hostel, and I was walking to work and coming back. And I don't want to trivialize, I don't want to compare my situation with endemic or generational poverty, because it wasn't anything like that. I could always call my parents, who were both financially well off, and ask for a loan, and I'm sure they would have said sure. Or I could have even asked my employer, who I was hesitant to do because I had just started the job, right? But I knew later that they would have gladly given me in advance. But as it was, I was too proud to do either of those things, and so I tried to scrimp and save and tried to budget. And I used to, in Boston, well anywhere, they still have, but they're a little more expensive. For 25 cents, you could get those kind of like little snacks, the oatmeal raisin cookies, the little Debbie snacks in the convenience stores. And so I would try to make one of those 25-cent snacks last as long as it could. And we didn't have any cooking thing in the hostel, so I couldn't make noodles or anything, so I mostly lived off those for a little while. And the money was just about to run out, and I wasn't sure what to do. And as I say, I would have had options, but I was too proud. I was thinking, what could I do? But I got a phone call, and I had a message to call my parents at the youth hostel. And I called my parents up, and they said, your second cousin lives in Boston. And we were in touch with her, and she said, come on, you can stay at our apartment. And now I didn't even know that I had a second cousin. I think I may have met this woman once, maybe years ago when I was a kid, but I had no memory of her. I had no idea, certainly no idea that I had a second cousin in Boston. But I was excited, of course, and I called her up, and she said, yeah, come on by, we'll find a place for you, this is where we are. So, and I was literally almost completely out of money. And so I went to work, and then I walked up to her place. I remember it was not snowing, it was a cold rain that January. And I had a pretty nice coat. It worked as a coat. But even so, it was raining, and I walked from South Boston to Somerville, which is a fairly long walk, and I got lost a couple times and had to ask for directions. And so here I was sort of soaked and feeling grumpy and grouchy, and finally I got to this woman's apartment, my second cousin. I knocked on the door. This woman I didn't know, and she invited me in. And all her roommates were there, and they said hi to me. And I remember that she was cutting vegetables, and they invited me to help cut vegetables. I don't even remember what we ate. I knew it was I think it might have been vegetarian, it might have been a soup of some kind or something, but it was the best meal ever. And I remember them saying, "Oh, do you mind cutting vegetables?" And I said, "Do I mind?" You know, here I was, and I was so excited. Here I was going to have a real meal, and even though I was so hungry, I hadn't eaten as much as I should for the last couple of days, I had this wonderful feeling of being in anticipation of this amazing meal. And all of a sudden, all these problems that I didn't see how I could fix, all of a sudden I had a place to stay and a warm meal. And that's basically the end of the story. I stayed on her couch for a couple days, I got an apartment, I got a bank account, all of that stuff went after that. But I always try and remember that story to know what it's like to be welcomed to the table. A welcome table is an amazing thing. And I know, Thanksgiving, which is coming up in a couple weeks, is this wonderful image of the welcome table. And it's a wonderful image of the bounteous table and folks around the table. And of course, the reality is not always the same as the image. I certainly think of the first Thanksgiving, which has been romanticized. The Wampanoag were not naive about the Pilgrims coming. They were wary, but there was little they could do. So they made a sort of uneasy military truce with the Pilgrims who were there. And so they were there, and they did sort of share some food at that truce, but it wasn't really a Thanksgiving feast. The Wampanoag actually every year had a harvest festival, Festival of Green Corn it's called, and so they had a harvest feast. And actually for the Pilgrim Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving that was announced by the governor of Massachusetts, some of you may know this, was actually commemorating a victory over the Indians. So we know how that turned out. It was not, it wasn't this wonderful, let's all get together and sing around the campfire. The first one was rather tense and awkward, and it got a lot worse in later years from there. So how do we celebrate such a complicated holiday? Well, most holidays, whether they're secular or religious, are pretty complicated. So we do our best to celebrate them, to celebrate the simple things while not glossing over the fact that history is not always so golden. And of course, Thanksgiving it's not always so golden either. It's often, there's somebody around the table that's dearly missed because they died either recently or years and years ago, and they're on the hard, it can be a very hard time for folks. And Thanksgiving is also a time when you get together with folks that sometimes you might not rather not get together for a day or two, right? And you kind of put up with it, and it's challenging. You think the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims had problems, right? It's challenging. It's going to be a tough couple of days. And sometimes you can't be together because of geographic issues or because of conflict. So there's all kinds of things that make Thanksgiving kind of a challenging holiday. But I think it's a holiday with a lot of opportunity. An opportunity especially for hospitality. And I think of, I'm going to share a reading with you, if I can find it, which is from a book that is sometimes radical, not always, but from the Bible. These words. So there's a saying of Jesus about when he's gathered around the table. And he says, when you host a dinner or a banquet, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they might invite you to a party of their own, and you'll be repaid for your kindness. Instead, invite the poor, the amputees, the cripples, the blind. Then you'll be blessed, because they can never repay you. Your reward will come from God at the resurrection. So I love that reading, because it's quite challenging. And sort of talking about Thanksgiving, it's easy, right, to invite people who are our family. Sometimes it's not easy, right? But for the family that we love and cherish, it's so easy to be there. For the neighbors that are great neighbors, and we hope to get the return invitation, right, 2 weeks later to go, it's easy to invite them over. That's easy. There's no karmic reward for that. So it's great, go ahead and do it. But inviting the folks who maybe are on the margins, or the folks who it's a little more challenging to extend that hospitality, what a difference that makes. And that, says Jesus, is what the welcome table is really all about. Not just inviting the people who give you that warm, fuzzy feeling, but inviting the people who it's a little bit challenging to invite over. I'm very grateful to come from, and my second cousin is a great example of this, but I'm lucky, and I didn't deserve this. It's a blessing and a grace that came out of nowhere, to come from a family that's a room for one more family. And some of you will know what I mean when every time around Thanksgiving, or Christmas when we gather around, there's always somebody around who maybe wasn't there the year before, who's a room for one more. We got room for one more, and sometimes it's 2 or 3 or 7 or whatever. That's always been a wonderful part of my holidays, to have somebody from outside the circle come in. My father is involved in international exchange programs, so often there were people from other countries, which is wonderful, because they don't know if you get the customs wrong. If you cook the turkey upside down, they say, well, this tastes terrible, but it must be an American custom, you know. So it's always been great to have an outsider come and sit at our Thanksgiving table, and that's always been a blessing of the holiday. And I try to think, in my own heart, how can I extend the hospitality a little bit outward? You know, who are the people who it might be challenging for me to invite to that welcome table, but it might make all the difference in the world, just as it made a difference to me for my second cousin, who didn't know me at all, basically, to extend an invitation and let me eat with her for several days and stay on her couch. And of course, this is true beyond just the family table. It's true in our society as well. Congregations are always trying to be welcoming. There's a whole thing about that, and growing congregations, which is a wonderful thing to do. A lot of the studies say that people make their decision whether to stay or go after their first visit in the first 3 to 8 minutes. 3 to 8 minutes. So I hate to tell you, but if this sermon is brilliant or if it's a dud, it doesn't really matter as far as visitor retention goes. They've already decided. It's in those first minutes when they first come into the building, when they first meet people, that they decide if they're going to come back. And there's all kinds of theories about what do you do to make sure that people come back and all this kind of stuff. But the truth is, it's more. I think it's more of a spiritual thing than any sort of logistical, you know, where you put pamphlets or where you greet people. It's people know. It's what's in your heart. People know. Visitors can see. You know, do you greet your friends the same as you greet, with the same warmth? Do you greet visitors with that same warmth? People can see. Are you excited for a new person to be there because they're a new person and they're going to add 1 to the number of members that you have? Or are you genuinely excited for a new person to be there because you're meeting somebody and they're a person and you really want to get to know them and you want to go get to know their story? And people can sense right away. We're smarter people. We can know right away what we come with. So the kind of intention that we're here with in community, that kind of opening our hearts a little bit more to the stranger, it makes such a difference. And I think it makes a difference not just for congregational health and vitality, and by the way, having come for the 3rd time, I think you guys are very warm, and I got that right away. First time I came to the door, folks were warm to me, so I salute you for that. And keep it up. But it's also true on a worldwide scale, that opening the doors, being welcoming, makes all the difference in the world. In the Hebrew Bible, Jesus wasn't speaking outside of a tradition. He wasn't making up new things. He was speaking in the Jewish tradition. And in the Hebrew Bible, welcoming the stranger is mentioned over and over and over again. Be kind to the stranger, for you were a stranger in Egypt. In Jewish history, the Jews were strangers in Egypt. So they remembered that historically, communally, mythologically, and they kept it in their bones that we were strangers. And so we have to welcome the stranger amongst us. And that word stranger is a very important word. I mean, it has been translated sojourner, it has been translated person in your midst. Really, the most closest translation is immigrant, but Bibles never use that because it's too political. But welcome the immigrant is really what the Hebrew text is saying. And that can mean a whole wide variation of things in terms of policy, but I'm not here to talk policy. I'm here to talk the spirituality of the heart. And how are we welcoming to the stranger in our midst, to the immigrant in our midst? And how do we open the door a little bit wider? And it makes all the difference in the world, because there are so many people, so many of us, so often, who don't feel welcome, right? Especially on the margins of society, who don't feel welcome really anywhere. Even especially, you know, in the churches, in the communities, on the street, who feel unwelcome in this world. And what an opportunity we have to give that welcome a little bit. I want to share one more story that a congregant at my former congregation, she gave me permission to share. She said at their house, and this is a story, a Christmas story, and I know you're already hearing Christmas stories and the Christmas music in the shop, so I apologize, but it's such a beautiful story of hospitality. She said at their house they have this snow globe, that they keep, and it's a very symbolic snow globe with a lot of memories attached to it, because it was many years before when this congregant's mother was recently divorced. which can be such a hard time, right? And she was recently divorced, and then she the kids, including this congregant, were with their father. So it was a very, very hard time for her, you can imagine, to be alone on Christmas for the first day and for the kids to not be there. And then the heat broke. And when the heat broke, she was trying to stay in the house. She just wanted to stay home and watch TV. You know, she just was trying to get this holiday over with. And the snow globe was kind of the old-fashioned snow globe, and it was worried that the water would expand and it would crack. And more to the point, she needed to stay warm herself, so she took that snow globe and she left. And she went in her car and she went to a supermarket. It was the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve, and the supermarket was still open. It was closing a little bit, and she was kind of walking around, getting a few things, just because the supermarket was warm, basically. And somebody from her congregation saw her and asked, "How are you doing?" And she said, she kind of hid it, you know, she wasn't somebody to put her heart on her sleeve. So she said, "I'm doing all right." But the congregant knew something was wrong. And so she insisted that this woman come over to her house. And they had Christmas Eve dinner together, and she was there, and they stayed over, and they even gave her a little gift, though I don't know what it was, but they basically gave her this wonderful treatment on this day when she had felt so miserable. And so now, that snow globe still has a place of honor in the family's house all these years later. And how many of us carry around snow globes that are almost in danger of cracking? And somebody comes along and offers warmth. And what would it be like if we could offer warmth to one another and carry that realization that we are carrying around, that we can save something precious in each other, that snow globe, that inner light, that inner wonder. So let us extend a welcome to one another and always have room for one more in our lives. So I invite us to sing our closing hymn, which is the whole inspiration for this sermon. It's an old spiritual, African-American spiritual, based on that text. We're going to sit at the welcome table. It's number 407.